Mr. Cooper, don't you know that Laura had secrets? Hey, what's up, guys? Zon Roberts here, just doing a bit of a Dr. Jacoby impersonation. Got my red and blue America glasses on. Probably not going to keep them on for this whole video, though. There we go. Today's video, I wanted to make a few things that I observed today. Recently, in the last day or two, I've been watching this show called Falling Water. I guess it's a show that was on the USA Network. I didn't know about it until now, but I guess it goes back to 2016, and now it's in the middle of its second season. It took a year off to make, I guess, the second season. And really, sort of like what drew me into it was that it got recommended to me. I guess because of my interest in Twin Peaks and I think the new Philip K. Dick Electric Dream show, which was decent, although I do have some issues with that as well, as the nature of this video has to do with some sort of cultural programming elements that I disagree with. But this one will focus on some of the stuff for Falling Water that I don't like. Now, I think that there are things that I do like about the show. I mean, it's an interesting concept. It's a compelling concept. Because basically it has to do with these three people who don't know each other, but somehow their dreams are interconnecting, and there's information being revealed of sort of a symbolic, complex nature. And so there's a lot of intrigue into it and stuff like that. And honestly, the more that I've watched it, I think the reason that sort of appeals to me is that it seems like it's trying to be sort of like a whitewashed kind of almost like sterile Twin Peaks or something. So it's probably just sort of like the complex symbolic elements and almost like Inception-esque sort of elements of secrets being kept in dreams and things of that nature that kind of appeals to me. So really, in a lot of ways, even though it's a decent show and it's got a decent writing and things like that, it really just kind of seems like a third-rate Inception or Twin Peaks or something. Some of the positives that I like about the show, like I said, I'm kind of in the middle about it. I think that's positives and negatives. Part of the complexity of the show, it seems that it's all about layers, and it seems like some of it is closeted, sort of loosely based around conspiracies, much like Twin Peaks, so that appeals to me. And one of the central premises of the story that I think is interesting is that it seems to be concerned with, at least partially, with this idea of the New Age deep state, fake New Age sort of cults. Not that all New Age is like that, although some would say that all New Age is false, but it's open to argument. However, it should definitely be stressed, I mean, that there definitely are, at the very least, some fake New Age groups that are nothing more than sort of closeted, nihilist, atheist, satanic cults. And the show, there seem to be allusions to the fact that this one organization, well, really, there's two sort of cults we don't really know if like they're connected or not. One seems sort of like an unofficial type cult, but they actually seem to be trying to help people and trying to find this kid who's missing, which is the premise of the show. And there's another one which is more of an official officially licensed New Age type group, which ironically, or maybe unironically, seems to be the more nefarious and evil of the two. And it's alluded to the fact that this official New Age cult may actually be involved with the corrupt bankers who are sort of buying and selling or trying to buy and sell this kid, or perhaps others, but they use a lot of a secret language to make it not seem like they're buying and selling children, basically. And at least in this isolated case with this kid who may have magical powers, he's written off. He's sort of being described as rare earth metals. And there seems to be this running theme throughout the show of like talking about rare earth metals, and this is supposed to be a sort of symbolism for children, or at least this one child. And there's allusions that this New Age deep state cult is involved somehow in this trafficking of this child. And it seems to me that it's a symbolic sort of reference to, at the very least, sort of satanic pedophile rings, because it seems to be a similar illusion as, you know, the buying and selling of children and using sort of opaque language to describe these things, but instead of like Pizzagate having to do, the children are called pizza and all that, it's like they're called rare earth metals in this case. So it seems to be like a reference to that. And I thought that was an interesting part of the show. One part that I started to not like, but then I realized that in the end that it was basically something that was good, because there was a dream sequence where the black character, is searching for this woman that he loves, this woman in red, which the woman who's the head of the New Age deep state cult, this white woman, was trying to convince him in a dream sequence that she wasn't real, or that he didn't know her, that it was a fantasy of love based on lies, and that all there is entropy in the universe, and there's no meaning to anything, and basically was just trying to stress a nihilist, atheist sort of message. And at first I was like, yeah, where is this going? I kind of thought at the moment that it was trying to kind of push a nihilist, atheist, possibly satanic sort of agenda. But then it ended nicely with the Burton character saying that he didn't believe her, and that he wanted to keep searching for the truth. And so, and then it snaps out of that dream into another one where this woman in red talks to him and basically says that he needs to keep searching for the boy, and that basically his search for the truth is warranted. So it seems like that was a turning point that I actually enjoyed. It kind of seemed like it was really sort of the Burton character sort of standing up against deceivers and false prophets, I suppose, which this head of the New Age deep state cult could be seen as a false prophet of sorts. It may be sort of not an explicit, but at least some sort of implicit, to leave you with the sense that the person who writes the show may believe in God or in some kind of higher power, so that's a good thing. And some of the things that I dislike about it, there's like some PC and some weird programming stuff going on in this show that kind of just like in some ways just kind of ruins it for me, because there's no like strong, white male characters, honestly. Not that there has to be, but I mean, like, it just seems like it's a part of this larger whole to just sort of like make white males out to be villains, as is most of the white characters in the show are villainous, or at least duplicitous and seen and meant to be seen as sort of the villain, because they're either like secret, hostile, aggressive male characters, or they're like these sort of these high-ranking, duplicitous sort of capitalist banker type guys or something, which in and of itself could be an anti-capitalist thing, but I'm not really. I'm sort of on the fence about capitalism myself. I don't think it's, I think it's got its positives and negatives, so that's neither here nor there. But the only like strong male character is like a black guy. There's like this whole weird like cuckold narrative which I'll talk about first. There's the strong black character guy, and there's this like kind of feminist-ish, strong female character, who's kind of the heroine of the story in many ways. And then there's this Japanese like detective guy who you'd think that like in the old world, maybe even as close to like the 80s or 90s, the Asian detective type had more in common with sort of like almost like the Union archetype of the sort of the strong Japanese warrior type, like the samurai or the yakuza. And so that sort of thing is probably naturally ingrained in the concept of the sort of Asian cop, Asian detective type guy. But here, and I haven't really noticed it in too many other areas, but I assume it's probably also going on in other areas. But here, the Asian cop character, who's supposed to be sort of a strong male guy, is sort of like, he's just sort of passive and sort of ineffectual, and he's not even like really all that great at his job. But like there's no like typical, I'm not really all that into like cop dramas and shit, but you'd think like usually how these things go, that there's some sort of fucking action sequences, where they're like taking out a bad guy or whatever, and there's nothing like that in this show, which it is a predominantly cerebral show, but you'd think you'd have some action like that, you know what I mean? And so far, the only action has to do with is with the female. The heroine attacks a few people who come after her. So it's just kind of funny that the Japanese cop guy, he's just sort of ineffectual and weak and stuff. It's like why the fuck would a person like that become a cop if they're like weak and ineffectual? It's like kind of stupid. It's not really true to like life, so I mean, but that's not really what makes him like a cuck type character. It's because quite literally there's a situation where he sort of falls for like this skinny therapist, progressive type lady, and eventually he has like this one of the dream sequences, and there's many dream sequences. One of the dream sequences involves him like watching her masturbate, but there's no other element to it, so automatically there it like looks like a cuck type situation, which then frequently, as happens in the show, what they dream about actually turns into reality. Later he actually meets up with this woman and goes to her house, and like she basically says that she doesn't date, and like what she's not into actual sex apparently. She just wants to like masturbate like while someone watches her, which she does. And then later afterwards, it's like she's like, you have to make up your decision whether you want to be with me, because for some people it's too much and for others it's not enough. You gotta make the decision. So the insinuation is like, basically, I haven't gotten into like, this is like 6th episode and I haven't gotten further into it, but the insinuation is that probably he gets wrangled into some sort of cuckold relationship, or at the very least he's sort of like just watching her like masturbate, but the insinuation is that probably she'll be fucking other guys and that sort of thing, and it just seems like it just sort of emasculating sort of like cuckold programming, and it just kind of it's just further evidence of how they're this further subversion of sort of traditional elements in society, and in this case like the subversion of like male archetypes, I suppose. Because going back, I remember I've seen a fair amount of like Asian films, going back to the 40s or 50s, and I remember plenty of like Akira Kurosawa films, like Seventh Samurai, or if you want to talk about something I forget, Zatuchi, I think it was called, the blind samurai, where they're just sort of like strong, masculine Asian characters, you know, samurais usually. But later, I think there were some Kurosawa films. I can't recall the names, but there were a few, or something of that nature, that were about like, you know, the Yakuza as well, who would also be sort of like strong Japanese male characters. And obviously the rise of sort of Bruce Lee and sort of karate culture and stuff like that would show that you don't really have to be sort of a typical buffed out sort of a wrestler type guy in order to like show sort of, you know, confidence and masculinity, I guess, because even the Yakuza, a lot of the Yakuza culture is a lot of these like skinny Japanese guys, but they can still be tough and stuff. So I remember like all this stuff, and even as close as sort of like that one director who I can't remember his name right now, but he's a pretty famous sort of new generation Japanese or Asian director, going back to the 90s. One of his films was like Ichi the Killer, and I think Old Boy was another one of them, where like a lot of his male characters were just sort of, they weren't like traditional male characters. I mean, they weren't like, usually they weren't like samurais or detectives or Yakuza or anything like that, but they were like these sort of like borderline deranged kind of masculine characters, but they're sort of like that crazy masculine, that borderline insane sort of masculine sort of vibe, sort of like a Japanese like Jack Nicholson or Dennis Hopper type of thing going on. The main character of Ichi the Killer was like that, but also Old Boy was kind of like that. And he actually did a few like samurai type films too, so it's interesting that he's just sort of like this weird avant-garde filmmaker, but he wasn't so progressive that he, you know, went away from, he was still traditional in some ways because of like the, you know, the masculine characters involved. So, and that was as close as like the 90s or the 2000s. It very borderline politically incorrect, I suppose. But back then, you know, we didn't see it as such. It's like more like the political correctness of like modern, of this decade, and really just like last 3 or 4 years has just gone into like insane mode. Ichi the Killer. Yes, Ichi the Killer. Takashi Miike. Takashi Miike was his name. Yeah, so, you know, even as close as like 90s or 2000s, like Takashi Miike films, you know, would be considered politically incorrect today, because a lot of his films were he was like sort of like in some ways like the Japanese Quentin Tarantino. There's a lot of violence and stuff like that. And I look back at those films and like that seemed like something you couldn't get away in America today without like, you know, some fucking feminist SJWs saying it's like fucking sexist or too violent or the male characters are too masculine or whatever bullshit, because it's literally like, you know, just if any type of male has like masculinity, it's like, it's not okay unless they're like black or something. Again, you know, not trying to get into like racial issues, because I'm not a white nationalist or an ethno state sort of guy, but I just think it's just kind of fucking stupid when the only strong male characters that are allowed in our society are like black people, because like, oh, they're the oppressed minority, so they're the only ones who are allowed to be like strong male characters or be sexist, you know, like in their the rap music. It just seems like a hypocritical like double standard, that they're the only ones who are allowed, you know, to be traditional males or whatever. And like, of course, you know, you can't be a white male like that or whatever. But it even seems like, judging by this show, like you can't. It's not even proper to be like an Asian or something like that, strong Asian character, because in some ways it seems like it is kind of like an SJW sort of reaction against, you know, the masculine Japanese culture, you know,
like I said, going back to the samurais and the Yakuza and so on and so forth. So that's one issue that I found annoying with the show. And it seems like, obviously, along with a lot of other shows, sort of like Bella and the Bulldogs and other stuff, like trying to like program this cuckold phenomenon, like, you know, trying to get men to be more submissive.
Okay, I just wanted to make a side note here. It's not like I really have any problem with, you know, men being sensitive. Clearly that's not really the issue here, because I think there's plenty of examples in art, in film, and music where men can be sensitive characters, but still not, you know, betray their own sort of masculine elements. Say for instance, like musically speaking, look at a band like Smashing Pumpkins, for instance. You know, they were, you know, Billy Corgan's songs were able to be, you know, he could go 1 minute and be doing something that's really a sensitive song, a melancholy type song, like 33, for instance, and the next minute do something sort of aggressive and in your face, like Bodies or Angels Fear to Tread, I think is the name. That's a perfect example. In a band setting, a band that could go from doing sensitive, you know, heart-wrenching type stuff, and then go over and do something like aggressive and in your face. And there's other there's examples in film, plenty of examples in film, for instance, like I know I've talked about this already in this video to some degree, but just take someone like Mulder, for example, from X-Files. Like, he had his sensitive moments. He had his moments where he was breaking down emotionally because of what happened to his sister and things like that. And the next minute he was able to, you know, hold his own and, you know, fight the bad guys and all that. So, and there's plenty of examples like that. Those are just two examples. You know, I don't know, like Pixies, Frank Black. There's another one who juxtaposes the sensitive with the aggressive and so on and so forth. And it just, David Bowie even has his sensitive songs. He has his sensitive moments, like the stuff off Hours, or a lot of what he was doing in the 2000s, like Heathen, or, you know, stuff like Outside, which had a lot of sort of aggressive type industrial type sounds. So, and it was a concept of him about like investigating serial murder. So, you know, Nick Cave, another perfect example. 1 minute he could go from singing about cold-blooded murder, you know, and the next minute singing about fucking redemption through Christ, you know. So, and that's probably enough examples right now, but I just want to say it's not the issue of I have an issue with like sensitivity in men. But there's a difference between being sensitive and being a complete cucked out pussy ass bitch. I mean, there's a big fucking difference now, and somewhere along the line, like, our culture, at least like the far left side of it, has lost sight of that. They want to do away with all masculinity. They want to cut it away completely and just worship, you know, the feminine. And, you know, you gotta have a balance. You gotta have a balance between the masculine and the feminine, the sensitive and the aggressive, the normal and the weird, and yada yada yada. It's like all things need to be in balance, and that's something even the Buddhists have said, that all things in moderation, all things in balance. And our culture has lost sight of that, and I think that this character in this show is just, he's, by allowing himself to be cucked, you know, he's given too much to the feminine. He's lost sight of that balance. We've gone from, in some ways, a culture that was maybe too masculine, maybe like 50 years ago, or 1,000 years ago with the Vikings or something, and progressed all the way to the point where we've gone in the opposite extreme to like being too feminine. And I think that's a problem in culture
We need to get back to a balanced approach. And the other issue that I have with the show, the strong female character, and again, you know, there's nothing wrong with strong female characters. Like you know, I remember in the '90s they had strong female characters, but it was like it was a less politically incorrect time, because just look at like the X-Files, which is probably one of my top 5 shows, at least in its original incarnation. You know, Scully was tough and she could handle her own, but she also had vulnerable moments where she, you know, there were numerous times where she like got kidnapped or her life was threatened and stuff like that. So it showed that like, yeah, she can be a strong female character, but she's also vulnerable to attack. Like it's not this fucking delusional Wonder Woman type mentality that a lot of women have these days. But more, you know, equally importantly was that like, you know, she was Mulder's partner, who was, you know, he was a strong male character, and even the lone gunmen, who are more sort of like nerdy type guys, who honestly I personally would relate more to, but they weren't like these submissive SJW type, you know, nerd types. Like Lanley especially was kind of like masculine in the sense that he didn't really take shit from anybody, you know, and he was really like sarcastic and things like that. So I mean, it just take a show like X-Files just did things correctly. Like, sure, there were strong female characters, but they're equally strong white male characters, and it wasn't politically correct. But you know, I've seen a lot more of this stuff these days. Is obviously it's like you know, the white male has to be submissive, and the white woman has to be, you know, the queen of strength and have no vulnerabilities, and it's just delusional. It's just feeding into this mass delusion. But there's a character like that in this show, Falling Water. There's one scene where she has this brief relationship with this white guy, this bearded white guy, but it's hard to explain. She's having like this dream. She's having these dreams where she thinks she has a son, and she remembers clearly her son's face. And then she's dating this one guy, and he just happens to have a flyer that has the same kind of face, and like a sea of like a million other flyers. And she freaks out and says, "Where'd you get this?" And he just honestly explained to her that like a guy on the subway was like handing him out, and so he just picked it up and thought it was cool, so he just put it up there. You know, which is probably the truth. You know, but she overreacts and like doesn't want anything to do with him, and gets her fired from like this dream study they're doing together. And then like from that point on, he's just showcased as sort of like being violent and volatile and threatens her and stuff like that, and just seems you fucking like, it's just a stupid like bitch move to like overreact about something and to get somebody fired. It kind of seems like, it reminds me of a girl I dated who was just admittedly like, she had borderline personality disorder, and she was just a pathological fucking liar, and she's just the type of person who would just make up lies about people. And I'm glad I got away from that. But I mean, you know, it seems like this society is like full of like women who think they can do no wrong, and who often in many cases overreact to situations, and then, you know, will call out a man as like a violent like abuser, or like a piece of shit or whatever, you know, a lot of times based on like lofty evidence, and in many other cases just sort of, you know, just outright lying just to get attention or money or whatever. And the kind of situation with this character, Tess, she's called, it kind of seemed like one of those moments. So in addition to the whole fact that her being like the sole heroine, and all the action that goes on is just between her and attackers and shit. So it's kind of like, you know, it's definitely PC in that moment. And yeah, that's all I can think of right now. But, you know, like I said, there are some positives to the show. It has good writing. It's decently complex. It's kind of intriguing, like, what is the deeper symbolic meaning to the show, like what are the layers and stuff like that. But in that sense, it really just seems kind of like a third-rate Twin Peaks. You know, kind of just watching it, I'm kind of like, yeah, I'd rather just be watching Twin Peaks, or maybe even like X-Files, you know, where they have that same kind of like, you know, surreal complexity and paranormal elements, but there's just no like PC nonsense being intertwined with it. So it's just like, in the end, it's like, yeah, it's complex, it's got good writing, but I'd rather just be watching Twin Peaks or fucking X-Files or some shit. So anyway, that's all I gotta say about that. See you later, bitches! Mr. Cooper, there's one thing you gotta know about Laura Palmer, and it's this. She likes to subscribe to Zon Margaret's channel. Right around here is where the subscribe button is, so Mr. Cooper, please go ahead and do that, or anyone else who's interested. Or right up here is a video. It's usually gonna be some sort of alternative, progressive, experimental song or performance, or it's gonna be a music video, or it'll be a surreal comedy skit, or it's gonna be a discussion, alright? And right here is gonna be something similar to that, or a playlist. Maybe the playlist will be right here. Okay, subscribe, bitches!